Hi, my name is Feli. Today I'd like to talk briefly about the importance of building principle-oriented paradigm. No doubt about the fact that when you want to build a principle-oriented paradigm, it is always important to get the foundations right. And what are some of these foundations which are important towards building a value-oriented or towards building principle-oriented paradigm? You talk about self-awareness. Self-awareness is very, very important when it comes to building a principle-oriented paradigm. Because with self-awareness, you will be able to get to know much about yourself, you will be able to know much about your strength, your weakness, and as well how well you could leverage on your strength as well as your weakness towards building the right paradigm, the right principles, and as well seeing how best you could integrate those principles into your day-to-day activities. Also, it is important for you to be able to associate high values to your self-awareness. That is, you want to associate high values, to qualities which are important. This isn't more of high values to qualities which are important. You want to identify those qualities that are important in nearly every areas of your life and see how best you want to associate high values to those qualities. Because when you don't associate high values to some certain qualities, by default, you are associating low values to them. That is, you're not giving them recognition. Take, for instance, commitment. If you've actually not come up and said, look, I'm associating high values to commitment. Let's take, for instance, on a scale of 1 to 10, let's assume you've not come up and said, look, I want to be much more committed. On a scale of 1 to 10, I want to have 9/10 in areas of commitment. You've actually not been able to come up with this and as well the rationale for that. Or perhaps you've actually not come up and said, look, in areas of loyalty, I want to have 9/10. No doubt about the fact that by default, your loyalty will be subjected to randomness. And before you realize it, you might be associating 0 to loyalty. And that's why you see in many instances some people don't see loyalty as something important. Because they've actually not been able to associate high values to loyalty. And the same thing applicable to honesty. When people are not honest, the simple truth is their paradigms would as well be affected. And the rationale behind that is simply because they've not been able to come up and say, look, honesty is a quality which I need to associate high values to. And thus, before you realize it, their loyalty or their honesty would be 0 or perhaps 1, because they've actually not associated high values to it. So one of the key ingredients towards building a principle-oriented paradigm is you being able to associate high values to those qualities which are important towards sustaining success in nearly every categories of your life. You don't want to build a paradigm without, or you don't want to build principles on perhaps unknown foundations. That is, by not building the foundations are right. So you want to first build the foundations and as well take a step further and develop value-based conscience. You want to ask yourself, your conscience, how valuable it is. There are instances in which people have actually not been able to map some certain things to their conscience. Take, for instance, someone who in one way or the other has a conscience. Let's assume he is a conscience. He has not been able to tell the conscience, look, commitment is good. Under certain scenario, this is how you're going to act. Under certain scenario, this is how you're going to act. And thus, by default, the person has actually not mapped those values or those qualities to the conscience. And you know the function of the conscience is basically to tell you, look, this thing is good, this thing is bad, just to serve as a guide. But in instances when you've actually not told the conscience what is good and what is bad, by default the conscience just assumes and acts randomly. And because of that, there are instances in which principles will not be able to thrive on such conscience because the conscience has actually been subjected to randomness. Take, for instance, you're taking a drive to a specific location and you have your map. You basically should type in the address and your vehicles your navigators will just take you down there. But because you've actually not been able to put in those navigations, I mean, you've not been able to type the address on the navigation, the navigation device, before you realize it, it's not going to, I mean, it could just take the random area or random route. And perhaps you might not even end up in your destination. And so that as well can be likened to the conscience. When you've actually not mapped some certain things to your conscience, by default, the conscience would assume and subject things to randomness. And thirdly, you want to understand your endowment. In order for you to have a principle that will be able to thrive over the long period of time, it is important for you to understand your endowment. And when you understand your endowment, it's going to be robust, because those principles will serve your natural endowment. When you are nursing your natural endowment, those principles will serve as guide towards you attaining success in the path of your natural endowment, and as well continuously record success. And lastly, you want to have a unique life vision. That goes a long way. That is more of you coming up and saying, look, this is actually what I want out of life. In this scenario, this is actually what I want. In this scenario, this is what I want. In this scenario, this is what I want. And these are the principles that are going to guide me towards attaining those things. And before you realize it, you will be able to build the right foundations. You will be able to build the principle-oriented paradigm foundations. And thus your principle-oriented paradigm will thrive over a long period of time. And before you realize it, you will be operating on an optimal paradigm. In other courses of ours, we'll discuss in details about optimal paradigm and the role it plays generally in one's categories of life. So I hope you enjoyed this short video. I look forward to sharing some other interesting tips with you some other time. Thank you.